So banking group Absa has removed Sipho Pityana from various roles within its board of directors, but he remains a board member of the financial services provider. The news comes as Pityana is embroiled in a legal spat over his bid to become chairman of the board. He since approached the court seeking a declaratory order against the Prudential Authority. In fact, he's alleging that the authority acted beyond its legal power. For more on the story and what we should read into it, let's bring in now Ronny Mkhwanazi, who is a corporate and trade lawyer, joining us now for his thoughts. And Ronny, it's great to have you on the program, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time. I don't want to take it for granted that everybody understands what's actually happening with the story, so perhaps let's begin with much needed context. The issue here, as I understand it, is that there had been allegations of sexual harassment against Sipho Pityana. He then resigned from Anglo Gold in the wake of that, but then he took the Prudential Authority some time later. Help us understand why he did that.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for having me. I think there's two issues here which needs to be separated. The issue relating to Absa, and then of course the issue relating to the board that he's resigned from regarding the allegations, as you say, the sexual allegations. But the previous issue regarding the resignation on sexual allegations is not the issue here, because that I am made to believe is an issue that is sub judice, and it remains an allegation for now, because where I'm sitting, for example, I haven't looked into it and see if there's any finality to the issue. But the main issue that arises here is that Absa, it appears, has removed Mr. Pityana from positions of trust, if I may put it that way, on the board, even though he remains a board member, because of the legal process I would suspect that he has with the Prudential Authority. And it's important to explain how the Prudential Authority works and why it matters here. So in the financial services industry, you have the Prudential Authorities that you refer to, and if you are to be a key person in any position in the financial services sector, there's then a requirement that the Prudential Authority should make a fit and proper judgment. In other words, make a call as to whether that particular individual is fit and proper. And the factors that we take into account, of course, is the reputation of the person, their history, their conduct in relation to their behavior generally as a professional and as someone in the industry and so forth. So the Prudential Authority therefore needs to be satisfied that the person is a person of integrity and has a clean character. And they would then give a judgment to say this person is a fit and proper person to take over this position. Now, in Absa's case, we know that by now that there was an issue around the appointment of Mr. Pityana as a board member, as a chairperson of the board of Absa, which position was vacant. And of course, the Prudential Sector Authority then came back and said, no, this person is not a fit and proper person, and as a result, Absa then decided that he shouldn't be the chairperson of the board. But of course, he's taken them to court now, and that means the matter is sub judice, and of course, the court will then become the final arbiter in terms of what actions should eventually unfold, whether or not the decision that was taken by the Prudential Authority that Mr. Pityana is not fit and proper was indeed a correct decision. And if it were found to be, the court will confirm it, and if it is found not to have been a correct decision, the court will obviously then set aside that decision, which may mean that Mr. Pityana may then become the chairperson of the board of Absa.
Yeah. Speak to us about the decision to not remove Pityana, though, as a board member at Absa, even though he's been removed, from my understanding, from being at the helm of two committees within the board itself. I mean, it almost seems like a half-hearted type action, at least according to many.
Look, I think the important thing to remember here is that, unlike in private companies, for example, that are not listed, if you have problems of integrity in your board, it normally just ends as a boardroom squabble. But for companies like Absa, which are listed companies and so forth, any action that happens within a board has severe repercussions for the company. So, for example, it may affect the share price of the company, which is what all shareholders are trying to avoid. So, and also on the other hand, you must then also balance that with the rules of justice. The Audi Alteram Partem rule, for example, which says you must hear the other side. So, you cannot just on the basis of an allegation, for example, act decisively on someone, because you need to follow due process. Remember that everybody in terms of the Constitution has a right for a due process to be followed. And in this case, I think that is what Absa is doing. So it would appear as though that the decision was to say that, there's a lot of allegations. There's been a ruling which is currently being, taken for review to court. And we cannot therefore pass judgment and say that, decisively Mr. Pityana has to be removed. And of course, perhaps he's an important member of the board in terms of the contributions he makes there. But I think the decision in the main from how it appears is to say that let's give him a chance to clear the air. Let that decision at the court be taken, and then let's of course also establish what the facts are around the Anglo board that you referred to earlier on. And then once they have, full information, then I suspect they would then take the necessary decisions to act, whether it being to fire Mr. Pityana from the board completely, or perhaps to reinstate him from the positions that he may have been removed from at the moment. So it remains to be seen in a nutshell, as to how the courts are going to come up with a decision on this one.
100%. Typically, how does the Prudential Authority work? I mean, do they usually make public the reasons behind the decisions they make, or is this the kind of first time we're likely to see this because of the court action?
Look, the decisions of the authority are important because, most people would make financial decisions whether to invest or not to invest in a particular institution based on the type of people and the characters that are in that organization. So once the authority has made a decision on whether someone is fit or proper or not, that information becomes public information. And of course, in the instance where, for example, someone may argue that this is not public information, but once it goes to court, then certainly that becomes public information, and the reasons can then be picked up from there. But the decision that the authority makes is a legal decision, and therefore it is subject to access to whoever has interest in following up the character of that particular person, certainly, yes.
So what has also emerged from the story is a conversation once again on the level of perception that Absa is purging some of its senior black leaders. I mean, Daniel Munele left the company, according to many, under a cloud in some respects, questions being raised. And so, I mean, how do you imagine Absa being able to negotiate the optics, at the very least, of what's actually happening here?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, perception in some cases becomes reality. I think over the past few months, Absa has been having a lot of leadership challenges. But in the end, I think what matters for a company like that is the business decisions it has to take. And depending on its appetite for social transformation, I think this would be an opportunity for Absa to perhaps look at, bringing in fresh skills from the industry, and to beef up its board and so forth. But we cannot sit here and pass judgment and say, yes, the issues, for example, relating to the most recent CEO, were issues around purging or so forth, because we don't have the internal information as to how that came about. But of course, it does create an impression that there is instability in Absa, and that perhaps there is a challenge regarding the transformation of the organization, I would say, Ayanda.
Yeah. Speaking of perceptions, there's also a whole lot of conversations now around whether or not Sipho Pityana will ever be able to bounce back from this. There is an image being created of the man, even if he is vindicated at the courts, given how long these cases typically take. Look, I think ultimately it's a question of fact in terms of, what the court will find in terms of the current judgment, and also in terms of what happened at Anglo. As you said, there's an allegation that he left there because of sexual harassment and so forth. So all of those things, of course, does damage someone's reputation. I always say to board members that we must always remember that, your integrity is ultimately, what matters in a board, because you don't want 20 years later for the sheriff to rock up with someone and say, hey, you guy, remember when you had the board of Absa, you did A, B, C, and D. So it's very important that, you take your role as a board member very seriously, and that, you lead from the front, because as you know, the feet rots from the head, as we say.
So I think whether or not he comes back will purely be a matter of fact. Perception, of course, does have an impact. And, of course, in this instance where, he's been shuffled around, I mean, he's even been removed from the REMCO, the Remuneration Committee of the board, which is a very key committee because that's effectively where the remuneration of executives, including that of the CEO, is determined. Now, you can imagine someone being removed from such an important role, casts aspersions as to the light in which they see him in the organization. And perhaps I can imagine for him as well as an individual, he also feels it's, somehow wrong and he wants to clean his name so that it enables him to sit on other boards. Because, of course, if he's going to, for example, be fired from this board or it's going to mean that, it's going to be very difficult for him to get onto other boards. So we can just wait and see what the final facts are. And then I guess from there we can have another discussion as to where to from here. Yeah.
That really kind of preempts my next question as we round up. I mean, what do you imagine Sipho Pityana ought to do next in a context where we've all accepted it's a matter that's largely with the courts really before there can be any kind of material way forward, for lack of a better term?
Look, I think in terms of, that violence, I think, every person wants to live with their reputation intact. And I think, that's a battle worth fighting if your reputation you feel is at stake. And I think for him, I wouldn't say, resign, because resign is the easy way out. And then, of course, sometimes if you just resign out of the blue, it may give an impression that, you're somehow accepting that you've done something wrong. So I think, in all fairness, to him and to the Absa board, we need to give this process a chance for it to reach its conclusion. And then I think after that, Mr. Pityana will be in a better position to know as to where to for him in that case. So I think we should have rather leave it there than cast any further aspersions regarding this issue.
Fair enough. It's certainly a story that many have said has rocked the sector, and at the very least, that's why we'll keep watching it. Thanks for helping us break it all down, at least in a way that you can. Ronny Mkhwanazi is a corporate and trade lawyer. Once again, appreciate your time.